Welcome to the Happier and Healthier podcast. I'm your host, Maria Marlowe, and this is a place where we don't rely on good luck or good genes for our health and happiness, but rather we create it with our thoughts and our actions each and every single day. Each week, I'll bring you a thought or a guest that will help you live your happiest and healthiest life. Are you ready? Welcome back to the Happier and Healthier podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Robert Graham, who is dual certified in both internal and integrative medicine. He's got a master's of public health from Harvard University. He was just named medical advisor to the New York City Department of Health. He co-founded and works out of his freshman integrative health practice in Brooklyn, and he is now studying to be a chef. Wow, that's a mouthful. So really interesting guy. We have a lot to talk about. I will just throw out there for anyone in New York City, Dr. Rob and I are doing an event on May 22nd called Real Food RX, or Real Food Prescription, and it's all about using food as medicine. So listen to the episode. If it's something that you're interested in learning more about, you can find the details for that on mariamarlowe.com. Right on the homepage, scroll down, and you'll find details about the event. Now, without further ado, let's chat with Dr. Rob. Dr. Rob, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Before I ask for any of your tips or any of your advice, I do have to ask about all the credentials. You have quite a few degrees and certifications under your belt. Did you always want to go this more integrative and more holistic route, or is that something that you decided after initially just going to medical school?
Well, Maria, thank you so much for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. And I've had the fortunate circumstance of always wanting to be a doctor. So I know many people struggle with what will I be when I get older. I really can't remember me wanting to be anything else. Well, maybe, a baseball player, but besides that, a doctor was what I wanted to do ever since I was a kid. But I always knew that, I guess through my culture and my upbringing, that this type of medicine where you just give pills wasn't going to be fulfilling for me as a person, and I don't think patients really get the best of what I think healthcare can provide if you're just doling out pills or procedures or surgeries.
So then you knew before you even went to traditional medical school that you also wanted to go beyond and go a little bit more integrative and holistic as well, right?
Yeah, part of it is it's my parents' fault, right? You always blame everything on your mom. And so my mom is kind of this interesting woman who is a traditional folk healer, and my dad is a biochemist. So growing up in that kind of model, knowing that my dad would come home and say, "Hey, Irene, did you give him Tylenol for the cold?" And my mother would say, "No way, are you crazy? I gave him this herb, or I gave him this soup, or I massaged the headache out of him, or I soothed his stomach with this tincture or this tea." I knew that there was a way you can do both safely and effectively.
Oh, that's incredible, because I think most people don't have that upbringing.
Right.
I know I personally grew up with all the traditional ways of doing things, a pill for every issue. So that's really awesome that your mom was massaging your headache out of your head.
Yeah. And what's really kind of cool is that I think many first generation, I would say I'm a proud son of an immigrant mother who had a dream to come to America. And it's not, abandoning many of your traditional health beliefs. It's how to incorporate that belief system into modern medicine. And I think that's what I've always wanted to do, right? Kind of combine and honor the traditional medical way of doing it within the framework of a conventional medical setting.
Right. So let's talk about integrative medicine, because you're both dual certified, right? Yeah. You're an internal medicine doctor and an integrative medicine. So what is integrative medicine, and why would someone want to seek out an integrative medicine doctor?
So it goes right back to the first question. So integrative medicine is defined as combining all forms of medicine and healthcare where there is an evidence base for its utility. So number one, and integrative medicine is evidence-based medicine, right? So it's the topics and the barometer of science has to be there for me to apply it in my practice. It cherry picks the best of what's out there. right? And so, again, going back traditionally, if omega-3 fatty acids or fish oils or eating more omega-3 fatty acid fish was good for heart, as you learned from the Italians, why don't we incorporate that into our modern healthcare? And that's what I try to do. In many traditional cultures, food is the primary source of medicine. And so integrative medicine, it combines all forms of healing for where there is a safe and effective evidence base for its use.
Right. I think that's important that you bring up that it is evidence-based and it's not just woo-woo or,
right. Yeah.
Someone sort of making this stuff up and hoping that it works, that there is actually a lot of research on different foods and their effect on the body and herbs and essential oils and all of these interesting things.
Yeah, and the opposite too, right, is that if you have a urinary tract infection and you get a culture and it has a lot of bacteria, there are things that can augment the benefit of an antibiotic, but if you have an infection, you need an antibiotic, right? And I think that's where the integration comes into play.
Mm-hmm. Right, you need a little bit of both.
You need both.
Right. So you and I actually really bonded over our belief in food as medicine. And I want to know why. I mean, it seems like you have it very clearly, but most doctors don't share the same viewpoint as you.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, whenever I've been to a traditional medical doctor, they've never asked me what I'm eating. And no matter what is wrong, for the most part, they want to prescribe either a pill or a procedure. Why is that the case? Why aren't more doctors educated in food as medicine?
So it's a Maria, it's a loaded question. Number one, I think as humans, we do what we're taught, right? And so, the way you tie your shoe maybe is different than the way I tie my shoe, right? Because you learned it differently, right? So therefore, in medical school, you got to understand where medical education happens, right? It's based on pathophysiology, which means it's these origins of diseases. It is not, you don't learn salutogenesis, the origins of health, right? It's 4 years long. And believe me that it takes a lot of time to learn about how diseases happen, how they are better managed, how they may be prevented. In that 4 years of medical education, there's very little room for anything else. And food is just one of them, right? We don't learn about the importance of meditation and relaxation. We don't learn the importance of exercise. We don't learn the importance of sleep or happiness, and there's that fresh model, right? Is because I think what I do in my practice, I really focus on you being your own doctor, right? Because we shouldn't expect doctors to know everything, but yet we want them to. And so in 4 years of medical school, particularly, and residency, and maybe fellowship, you're learning how to manage conditions and not learning about food as medicine or the other pillars. And so as much as I would love for all my colleagues to know about food as medicine, they're just not taught that. So yeah, you can blame them because they don't know it, but then I think you have to look back and look at the medical system. Right.
It's just they're not not taught.
They're not taught. And similarly, kids of America today, this is the third generation of kids that are not taught how to cook. Right? And so do you think it's by accident or by circumstance that the rates of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol are in kids who are, teenagers now? Right? They don't understand about food. They don't understand about cooking. So therefore, how can we expect us to know that?
Right. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Over the last really 50, maybe 100 years, we have put cooking to the wayside and to take in convenience instead.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up, cooking was a chore. It was something that you had to do and you didn't want to do. It wasn't something that brought health or brought the family together, things like that. It was just a chore.
Sure.
So you've been using food as medicine in your own practice, and I know that you've also started a few initiatives to teach other doctors how to use food as medicine, and now you're even studying to be a chef, which is awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to actually go back to school to become a full-fledged chef as well?
The main reason why, because I wanted to have a bigger impact in my patients' lives. And I think something like learning the culinary arts and learning the techniques and learning how, if you really kind of put your love and quote-unquote medicine into the food, it actually can do amazing things for your health. And beyond just being, a doctor who understands food as medicine and prescribes it and refers to dietitians, I think there's something very powerful about literally cooking something for someone else. I think there's no greater transference of love than that act of, like as you called them, doing a chore, going, getting prep, and then cooking, and then executing it, and then sitting, and then cleaning for someone else. I think that's such a beautiful thing, and I think that is where true healthcare happens. It starts in the kitchen.
How's it going? How is it like training to become a chef?
Oh, it's exhausting. Cuts, burns, standing on your feet for a long time. Listen, I'm in my mid-40s too, and a lot of these chefs start off in their 20s. I'm older. I can be some of my colleagues' parents, but I love it. I think if I did this 20 years ago, I wouldn't have felt the impact of what this training can do for both me as a doctor and as a foodie too, I guess.
Yeah, you probably appreciate it a lot more.
I completely understand how long it takes to chop garlic in an Italian restaurant, I just think about how long it takes to chop one head of garlic. Right. And then, we just slap it on and eat it, mindlessly.
Right. Well, that's a good point. When you realize how much work goes into prepping all these foods, and even relatively simple dishes, you want to eat it more mindfully because you know all the work that went into it.
Yeah, just think about when you go to and like kind of splurge yourself at a very expensive restaurant, right? It's funny how the mind works this way, right? So if you go to an expensive restaurant that's probably outside of your price point, number one, it's beautiful, right? You always say, oh, that's it, right? But the way they prepare it and the way they make it look and the way you eat it before you even eat it, right, with your eyes, at the end of it, you say, my God, that was totally worth it. But if you really think about it, right, you eat it slower, right? And so you taste it more. But was it really worth it, right? I can say as the guy who's prepping the food for you, it takes a lot of work to make things look beautiful and delicious and tasty, and so it is worth it. But just think about that next time you go to a restaurant, right? The cheap ones have this huge mound of food, but the expensive ones is a tinily tailored dish.
Right.
But somehow that experience is more worth it than the big slop of stuff that comes off of cafeteria line.
Right. Well, when you're paying for it, I think you want to be a little bit more mindful.
Yeah.
So you do slow down and savor it a little bit more. And like you said, eat with your eyes, eat with your senses, smell it, and really just savor and taste each and every bite.
Yeah, it's the whole experience of it all.
Yeah, so it might actually be a good thing to go to an expensive restaurant every once in a while.
Treat yourself once in a while, right? Treat yourself once in a while.
Totally. So beyond food, I know food is a very big part of your practice and what you teach, but you have this whole framework called FRESH that stands for a few different lifestyle factors that also contribute to our health. So let's talk about those. What is the FRESH model? What does that all stand for?
Sure. Yeah, so as I mentioned to you before, like many good ideas, right? I'm fortunate enough to work with my wife, who a couple of years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago, we were at dinner on Valentine's Day, and I was kind of tired, and maybe we can get into this later about how I left a really kind of good job with the good degrees and to really start something fresh. And I love the word fresh because it means new and never seen before, and it makes a great acronym. And so the acronym you were alluding to is food, relaxation, exercise, sleep, and happiness. And we're playing with that idea that it's the 5 pillars of well-being, it is the 5 ingredients to your health, but more importantly than anything, it's if you have those 5 key pillars in your life, medicine is of little need or of no need, because ultimately you are your best doctor. You go to the doctor because you need something, but in fact, if you adopt those 5 pillars of well-being, you may not need a doctor. I'm not saying it's easy, but they are synergistic. And they work on each other, right? So just imagine, when you eat well, you're more likely to feel good about yourself and therefore exercise more. And if you exercise more, you sleep better. And if you sleep better, right, you're relaxing more. And then at the end of the day, you're happier. Of course, I say that food is the most important pillar, and our motto is, when it comes to health, it starts with food. But at the end of the day, what everyone really wants in life is to be happy, right? So there's not one greater one. But because of, the doc chef thing, food is the strongest pillar. But I cannot minimize the importance of meditation and relaxation. And it doesn't have to be meditation, right? We just need to get out of our own head and our own voice. Exercise, you just have to move. We are mammals. We need to move and release and burn that energy. And just like every other mammal, we need to sleep. And I consider sleep a medical necessity. And it's probably one of the greatest epidemics that is in our control. And at the end, I think why we do this is, why do we get up in the morning? Why do we live with meaning and purpose? It's ultimately in this pursuit of happiness. And happiness can be scary too, pursuing it is a challenge, because not every day you wake up happy. But you have to kind of work your mindset into that kind of steady state of minimal happiness every day.
Right. Well, that's what I would say. Happiness is a choice.
It's totally a choice.
So, yeah, it doesn't really depend on your circumstances. It depends on your mindset and your perspective, how you see things, for sure. So I want to go back to that relaxation pillar, because I feel like, especially here in New York, it has become a badge of honor to be stressed. And I think sometimes we are just so frantic and overwhelmed and have so many things going on. We get so used to it that many times we don't even realize that we're stressed, or we feel like, oh, we can handle it. So what are some ways that we can reduce our stress that don't necessarily involve a glass of wine?
Yeah.
Or don't even necessarily, I know we talk about, meditation has become much more popular these days, and I love meditation, but I think for a lot of people, the idea of meditating is just completely repulsive, unfortunately.
Yeah.
At some point, they might get there. But what are some other things people can do to relax?
Well, for those listeners, Maria, I would like to say something. So those people who say they don't have time to meditate actually need more meditation in their life, right? So if you can't meditate for 5 minutes, that actually means you need to meditate for 20 minutes a day. But I get it. Actually, this is Julie's kind of world, my wife's world, is that meditation is a way to achieve it, but there's millions of ways to achieve it, right? And I think what we try to do is identify the things that make you feel in flow. And flow is when you lose track of time because you enjoy doing something. For me, obviously, me being in the kitchen is a flow experience. Me going to the Yankee game is a flow experience, right? So I think there's many things. Hanging out with friends. How many times have you been out with your friends, right? And you're supposed to go out for dinner. And then it's 10:30 at night. You met them at 6, right? Because you're really having a good time. That's a relaxation, right? Music, spending time outdoors. And I say it's easy, we're New Yorkers, right? And to find that here in New York is what it's all about. Going to a beautiful island, going onto a beach. I always say these California kids that have it easy because it's easy to feel relaxed on a beach. But to do it New York style in the middle of Central Park, or in the middle of Bryant Park, that's where the challenge happens. I had the great fortune of meeting Dalai Lama years ago, and he says, meditating is the easiest thing to do. Remembering to meditate is the hardest thing to do it. So it goes back to my original point, is that meditation may be nerve-wracking or intimidating. What we're focusing on this year is breathing. Just be aware of how many times you breathe. And when you're not breathing, it's probably due to some sort of stress. And like now, I've been talking a lot, right? And so talking, and in fact, is stressful. I have not taken a deep breath. So I think our body talks to us when we need just to relax. And it's as simple as a deep breath. And I think once you kind of be more aware of the fact that you have this stress response and your body is talking to you constantly, you just have to pause and take a deep breath. And that's probably the cheapest, most portable, non-invasive thing that you can do to tap into that relaxation response. Just remember to breathe.
It's so true. Our breath is really important. And you would think that we don't really have to think about it because breathing is something we don't generally think about. It's something that just happens naturally. But you have to ask yourself, how are you breathing? And yeah, in the moment when you're stressed out, it is a good idea to sit back and just calm down and breathe deeply, but also think about how you're breathing every single day. So personally, I just found out a few months ago that I've been breathing the wrong way for years. I went to a vocal coach and she pointed out that all of my breaths were super short and shallow and that I was only breathing into my lungs. And as a result, I was only speaking from my lungs, so my voice was not as strong. And she said that this way of speaking is the way that we speak when our body is in fight or flight mode or when our body is stressed. when we're in a relaxed or just normal state of being, we should actually be breathing into our belly. So I started to think about, how did I go off track? Why did I start breathing this way? And the more I thought about it, I realized it was my environment. Living in New York, whenever I'm walking through the streets, I always have my guard up. I'm just trying to get where I'm going, trying not to be harassed. And it's always go, 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 go. So I could see perpetually being in that fight or flight mode. But the crazy thing is, I didn't realize I put myself in fight or flight mode. I thought the way that I was breathing was normal.
Most people actually, a third of their lung, the top third of their lung is where people usually breathe from and project from. And it's primal, right? If you look at babies, right, they're all belly breathers. If you look at animals, all of them are belly breathers, and we're animals. And so we have the ability to breathe very deeply. But because of everything you just mentioned, we breathe from the top third, and we're not getting the right oxygenation. That's why we may be a little tired. We don't get enough blood flow to the brain when you do that. And now you're learning more and more about the direct link between the mind and the gut. And then when you activate that kind of stress response, or that vagus response, that nerve that really stimulates that relaxation response, that's directly triggered from your gut to your brain, it's only done through very deep breaths. So for those people out there scared of meditating, how about I challenge you to breathe deeper every day? I think that's a simpler way to do it.
Yeah, start with breathing. And then with meditation, that was something I was scared of for a long time. I mean, years ago, when people would always talk about it, I was like, oh, it's not for me. It's too boring. I can't sit still for 5 minutes, let alone 20. But I found doing guided meditations really helped. And that way I had someone's voice leading me through, and that would help pull me back. So that's another good option as people can try.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, maybe you can have Julie on this, because this is her sweet spot on this whole thing. And we actually do a lot of events where we don't recommend one type of quote unquote breathing or meditation, right? Because we all find our way. And for many people, mindfulness is a way. Guided meditation is a way. Transcendental meditation is a way. And so we kind of do what we call a speed dating meditation, so that we give you 10 minutes of each of those types of meditations so that you can find your way. It's interesting. Many women like the guided way. Men tend to focus on mindfulness. But either way, being still and being quiet with your own thoughts, especially when you don't have the big H at the end, the big happiness, can be very scary, And so you are your greatest teacher, I always say, and sometimes you don't want to listen to that greatest teacher.
Right. And another point you brought up is try different methods, because you might not like one and then you throw it all away and don't pick it up ever again. But yet there are hundreds of different ways of actually doing it, and you just didn't give them a chance. So make sure you try different modalities, try different things, and find the one that you like.
Invest in yourself.
Right. So let's talk about that big H, the happiness factor. What I see a lot is people talking about, I'll be happy when. So when they have a boyfriend, or when they get a different job or a different apartment. And really, very often we will place our happiness on external factors. But the truth is, happiness is an inside job, right? So how do we start making that switch to cultivating our own happiness from within?
So one of the things I always say is that, like I said before, invest in yourself. And don't wait for something, someone, some time to bring you happiness, right? Because as a doc, I've been a doctor for 15 years, seeing patients, and I hear it all the time. Once I retire, unfortunately, people don't get that opportunity. Start spending money now on things that you love. Start spending time with people that you love. Start finding your true self, because as Jay-Z says, this ain't a movie, dog. This is not a movie. This is your life, and once you identify the things that truly bring you happiness, life is just more fun, right? But you're exactly right. It's an inside job. We can all find happiness in different ways and in different times and in different things. I firmly believe that it starts with an attitude of gratitude. You just got to be grateful for opening your eyes today. Many people don't have that luxury. If you're here in America, be grateful that you're here in America. With all the stuff that's going around in America, be grateful that we have the ability to be who we are here in America, have rights. I don't want to get into all that stuff, but despite whatever's going on, it's still a great country, and we should have this attitude of gratitude to be alive. The other thing, and I think it goes back to my wife's ideas through her learning in positive psychology. Positive psychology is simplified in three simple words: other people matter. And no money brings you happiness. Money can bring you happiness. But what they found about money is that it just makes you more of who you are. So if you're an asshole, you're going to be an asshole with money. And if you're a nice guy, you're going to be a real nice guy with more money. So it doesn't change you. It's really people that you surround yourself with. It makes you happy. Chris Peterson, one of the founders of positive psychology, said it like that. Other people matter. And the other thing that is what I know my wife does on all her clients is has them do the VIA character strengths test. And it really focuses on your 26 strengths. It doesn't focus on your weaknesses. And you try to align your life and your mission to what your strengths are. Now, strengths can change, but once you identify what you're good at, it's a lot easier from going from good to great than from bad to good. So I think that's those like two things I like to talk about: attitude of gratitude and find your strength.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely second that about the attitude of gratitude. I start every single morning. The second I wake up and open my eyes, I will list all the things that I'm grateful for and think about all the things that I'm grateful for. And I'll just keep repeating in my head, I'm grateful for X, Y, and Z. I'm grateful for this, I'm grateful for that. And it really does, I feel like, calm me a little bit and help me start the day in just a happier and brighter place.
Totally. And it's intention driven, right? You put out an intention of that day. And how many times, like in New York, right, when you have that good day, that good morning, the lights seem to click, right? The train shows up on time, right? You find $1 on the street, right? If somebody kind of says hi and smiles at you. That's the other thing, smile more.
Yeah.
Right? How do you bring happiness? Just smile more. Smile at others.
Yeah, it's kind of like the fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
If you look happy, you'll eventually feel it too.
And then, the other thing, it's like if you smile at someone, people tend to smile back. And then boom, you just kind of connected with somebody and you made them a little more happier.
Right.
So
I love that. I'm curious, what are your strengths? I'm sure you've done the test.
Yeah. My first strength is judgment. Right? So I think as a doctor, you kind of need to weigh the pros and cons of things. My second is love. And my third, I can't remember. But I know that my wife's is creativity and the second one is love. And so it's always an interesting conversation because I'm always kind of weighing the pros and cons of every decision. And she's the one with the creative mind thinking, we're going to go to the moon and back. Right? And so it's a great exercise to know where your strengths are.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
You got to take yours.
I will. So speaking of relationships, though, I love your wife, Julie. She is an amazing woman. She is a yoga teacher. She's a health coach. She's very well versed in this positive psychology. And I know that you guys work together, right? You do Fresh Med together.
Yeah.
So I noticed that relationships is not one of your pillars in the Fresh protocol. So I'm curious why. And my second question there is, how is it working with the person that you love?
Yeah. You know what? We're lucky. So let's go back to Fresh, right? So Fresh is a self-care model of healthcare. Is that you don't need anyone else to get fresh. So therefore, we've struggled with it. Yeah, actually, relationship was one of the top things we were going to bring in. And S was going to be, we were not going to use relaxation. We were going to use relationships. And S was cubed, right? So we had stress, we had sex, and we had sleep. But, relationships were complicated, sex is complicated, and we figured that stress is a negative word. So if we focused on relaxation, it was more positive. As you can tell, I'm avoiding the relationship question. But I just think it's on you. I think the whole point of Fresh is that it's on you. And once you define what makes you fresh, or, once you get your food right, your relaxation right, exercise, sleep, happiness, once you understand who you are, your meaning and your purpose, and you're happy, then that's when Mr. and Mrs. Right, he, she, it comes into your life, And a relationship doesn't have to be a man or a woman. It can be a dog. It can be something that brings you some love, right? And so we thought about relationships. but neither of us are real relationship experts. The fact, by definition, we are, right? Because we've been together for 22 years, married for 18. So, I love these relationship experts that are on their third wife or, are constantly breaking up. And so the true testament of a real relationship is longevity and happiness. Despite us working together on Fresh, we still find a way to be happy. And knock on wood, 18 years later, actually June 5th, it's going to be 19 years.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah. No, 18. She's going to kill me for this. No, we've been married for 18 years this year.
Okay, that's still, you've got quite a long...
Exactly. Yeah, so, it's cool. Working with someone, it can be challenging. But again, going as, I'm literally bringing this up as you're talking about it, as you identify your strengths, where their boundaries are, right? Because I got to let Julie be creative, because I can't not allow her kind of that creative mind. Because if I bring her back down all the time, it's just not going to work out.
Right.
It just works out.
Yeah, so you kind of balance each other.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. But how do you ever turn off, or are you guys always working?
That's a good point. It's always pleasurable work, except when deadlines happen. Right, but otherwise, I think it's pretty pleasurable. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. For someone that you don't have the relationships in your Fresh protocol here, but I think that you guys are actually a wonderful example of a great relationship, and you guys do work really well together, and it's really nice to see that, because you don't always see that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people will say not to work with your partner, but I personally think it's the best thing that you could do, because you both share that vision, and
it's also respect, right?
Right.
And so like when somebody needs a science of an article, or like someone calls me about, would you mind speaking on this? I come in with the science. But then Julie has the art of meditation, right? I can talk to you about the science of meditation. Julie will bring you the art of it, right? And I think it's a nice kind of balance.
Right.
No, but it's...
it's a beautiful thing.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Maria.
All right, so let's switch over a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about healthcare and food in healthcare. So we're living in a time where there's some crazy health statistics. So according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, about 70% of the country is overweight or obese, and 1 out of every 2 men and 1 out of every 3 women in this country will get cancer at some point in their lifetime. So if we know that food has such a huge impact on our health, what can be done? What is the future of food in healthcare, and how can we change some of these statistics?
So number one, you actually said something that most people don't realize, right? The Center for Disease and Control, right? It's CDC, but you actually said "NP." I don't know if you noticed you said that, right? Because most people have never heard the P part. Right, because that agency is to understand where diseases happen, but it's also the P, right, which is probably the most important part. The easiest way of putting out a fire is not starting one, right? And I think that's what we have right now, right? We have a house that's completely on fire, and we can get as many water trucks, we can get as many firemen, we can flame retard it, we can do anything. But again, going back to the P that you mentioned, it is the best way to do this. But now, unfortunately, it's a fire. And your statistics are right. And just last week, a study came out saying that 40% of people are obese. So obese, is a category where your BMI is over 30. Now, the fastest growing sector of obesity is called the morbid obesity, where your BMI is over 40. So people are getting fatter, despite all your hard work, despite all my hard work, despite, sweet greens and fresh direct, whatever you want to call out there, doing their best at it, people are still getting fatter. And what's sad is that they're getting fatter, the fatter are getting fatter, which is probably the worst scenario of this whole thing. The good news is that there's been recently a tip that childhood obesity has kind of just paused. It hasn't reversed, but it's just paused. And maybe it's the fact that the reason why I still do what I do is because I'm not trying to convince my colleagues, who are older than me, that food is important, that food is medicine. Because honestly, we never really tested the hypothesis yet, right? If you don't mind, if I'm just going to go a little research on you, right? And so in research, what you do is you identify the double-blind placebo-controlled trial. What that means is that you have a population of people, you give them a drug, and you give this population no drug. Does a patient in the population with the drug do better? Let's say hypertension, right? You give somebody a pill for hypertension, and in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, their blood pressure is controlled. The drug is better than the placebo. Despite our best efforts, right, we have never done a food as medicine trial, right, until most recently, right? Because food is very personal, it's cultural, it's specific, it's sensitive. Julie always says, never take food away from a huggy dog, right? And so if I try to take away meat off an omnivore's dinner, they're going to be pissed. Or, I try to enforce any sort of dietary theory onto someone else. They have to kind of come to that mindset on their own. So it's very hard to do those kind of trials. And unfortunately, in medicine, that is what the gold standard is. So we can't prove that food is as good as medicine. Although intuitively, right, we know that bad food leads to bad health. So therefore, the inverse should be true, right? The good food should lead to good health. But it hasn't been, quote unquote, proven.
But it doesn't mean it's necessarily not true. Right?
Absolutely, right. But you look at places where, like the blue zones. I think it's one of the most fascinating epidemiological studies of the world. Everybody wants to know what makes you live to 100 healthy and happier, and it's out there, right? It's the blue zones. If you don't know about it, go out and Google blue zones, Dan Buettner, Natural Geographic. It is the 5 places in the world where people live to 110 times the rate of us Americans. And they do it healthfully. That's changing too, I heard. For example, Okinawa has one of the fastest growing McDonald's sectors. And so wherever American food goes into the world, illness follows.
Right. As you probably know, and many of you listening know, I started getting into healthy food for a number of reasons, but one of them was my skin. So I've done a ton of research on the connection between diet and acne. And I was looking at some research also about Japan, and Japan almost didn't have acne, or had like a very, very low rate of acne until, I believe it was the 1950s, when the American food started coming into Japan. So before that, when they had the traditional diet with all of the whole foods, mostly plant-based and great seafood, acne was pretty much unheard of there. So yes, it's wherever the American food goes, the issue.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. I don't know if we're going off topic, but I think the fascinating topic. So when I was at Harvard, in my public health, I have a master's in public health. And so one of the things we found out that when we introduced the dairy program that we have in our school systems here into Mongolia, they realized that young girls who started drinking more milk in Mongolia were sexually more developed. And what happens with sexual maturity is that you have the ability to get pregnant. And an unintended consequence of the dairy food system that we introduced to Mongolia was that young girls were getting their periods, therefore teenage pregnancy increased. Which, again, you don't think about the downstream effects of it all, right? And I think goes back to your point here, is that we got to get this thing done right, And I think food can be, the greatest medicine, or it could be the greatest poison. We just have to be dairy aware. That's how I like to put that, okay? We just be aware of where our dairy comes from, how much dairy we're eating. I'm not a big fan of dairy, but to each his own. And the problem with our food system here in America is that it's not full of rat poison because you would die tomorrow, right? It's just low levels of lethal exposure in a lifetime that accumulates, And I think, going back to your story, an ice cream bar, once probably is not going to make you break out. But a continuous exposure to dairy and other foods will make you break out and give you GI symptoms. In my practice today, I would say 60% of my practice is all gut related. Thank God that we're starting to understand more of the role of the microbiome and the probiotics in our gut. But at the same time, you shouldn't have gut issues every single day. If you have acid reflux, that means the food doesn't want to be in there. If you have diarrhea, it doesn't want to be in there either, right?
Push it out.
Exactly.
Your body's trying to get rid of it.
And then if you're constipated, the body doesn't even know what to do with it, right? And so it's by no coincidence, that people that eat mostly plants, fruits and vegetables, less meat, have low rates of constipation. You think that's by coincidence? It's a direct impact about what we do in our mouths every single day, 21 times a week at the minimum.
Right, for sure. That all being said, what do you feel like is the future of food in healthcare?
So, I sit at a very interesting space, right? Because, I am a primary care doc. I do internal medicine, but I'm board certified in integrative medicine, what we spoke about earlier. I have a food first approach, but I also believe all the pillars of well-being are just as important. But now, being a chef, what I find is that people are just confused. Unfortunately, we all have family members with diabetes, heart disease, gout, arthritis, and a lot of people ask me the question, so doc, what should I eat? And I think being at that space, the interconnection between food, health, and healing, I feel that the future of food in healthcare is food as medicine. And what I mean by that is that, so if you have a disease-specific symptom, what I hope to do someday is design a meal kit or a meal plan specific for your chronic diseases. And to a certain extent, cancer too, right? As you mentioned before, the statistics are crazy. And studies after studies have shown that 70 to 80% of all these chronic diseases, diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, to a certain extent cancer, are preventable and reversible with healthy life choices. Food probably being the most important. And so I think the future is where we actually can tailor, just like we do medications, for disease-specific symptoms. And I hope to be at that forefront of designing meals, meal kits, dinners for patients so that they can feel comfortable and stop asking me that question, what should I eat? And I bet you get that all the time too.
I love that. And I love that you prescribe food. And it's interesting that it's such a revolutionary concept over here. But, in traditional Chinese medicine or in Ayurveda, when you go to a doctor over there, they will tell you, stop eating this, start eating this.
Sure.
So, I think it's just a matter of time. And that's amazing. I think that would be wonderful if we just had that easy button and can say, okay, this is what's going on in my body, this is what I have, and you could say, okay, here, eat this, and you're done. And
and I think part of like what I do, my clinical practice is that integrative medicine really, again, cherry picks the best about all, but it really honors the traditional medical belief systems, right? And so I'm not I'm a new messenger of an old story, right? And this is what's the difference of like a lot of these, what we hear about functional medicine docs now, they use a lot of testing, which is great because we have the ability to test, but I think we don't have to test people if they're morbidly obese. The chances are they have these chronic diseases. So therefore, you put them on a diet plan first, right? A food first approach. And then you use the testing like blood work, saliva, gut testing that we can do nowadays just to kind of have objective measurements to change someone's life, right? And I think the future of healthcare is like that whole kind of holistic view of you, just not what diseases you have, but who makes you you? Why do you do what you do? So I feel like there is hope at the end of the tunnel here.
For sure, of course, there's always hope. That's our happiness, our positive mindset.
We have to have an attitude of gratitude, right? Exactly. But you guys understand it. The young people get it. The old people don't so much.
Well, I love that you just called me young.
Yes.
So one last question for you. We talked about a lot of things. Fresh has a number of different factors. But if there's just one piece of advice you could leave people with who want to live a happier and healthier life, what is that piece of advice?
Oh, love yourself and invest in yourself. I think that's probably, you can't give if what you don't have. And so I think you can't pour from an empty cup, and so if you love yourself and you invest in yourself, you don't think about anything else, right? It's a little bit of selfishness that you have to have. It can get crazy, but if you just truly honor and love yourself, everything will fall into place.
If you enjoyed this conversation and want to learn more about using food as medicine, on May 22nd, Dr. Rob and I are doing an event in New York City called Real Food RX, and it's all about using food as medicine in both a general sense and a more specific sense. So we're going to look at some of the most common ailments, whether it's digestive issues, acne, low energy, PMS, and we're going to help you figure out if your diet may be contributing to those issues, and if so, what changes you can make to start feeling better every single day. Tickets for that are on mariamarlowe.com. You can get the link right on my homepage, and I'll also put it in the show notes for this episode, which is mariamarlowe.com/podcast. Thanks for tuning in this week. If you enjoyed and got value from this episode, I'd be so grateful if you can take just 1 minute to leave an honest review on iTunes, as that will help us reach more people and get incredible guests on the show. To say thank you, email a screenshot of your review to info@mariamarlowe.com and we'll send you a free 3-day healthy eating sugar detox meal plan. After each and every episode, I encourage you to come say hi on Instagram @Maria Marlowe, that's MariaMarlowe, or in the private Happier and Healthier podcast group on Facebook. In both of these places, we can continue the conversation about today's episode, so come and share what you think. If you want more, you can also head to mariamarlowe.com, where you'll find tons of healthy recipes, meal plans, and resources to help you live your healthiest and happiest life. Lastly, if there's someone you know who'd enjoy this podcast, make their day, and mine, and send it to them now. Until next time, don't forget, health and happiness are a choice. Our thoughts become our reality, so make sure you're thinking up a masterpiece.